Chapter 901. Kelvin dashed forward amidst the gunshots. When he saw the terrifying scene, he was startled as well. Mr. Miller. Ethan was in so much pain that his forehead was covered in cold sweat. His lips were pale, but still, he said, "Save Liv first." The door on the passenger seat was right against a wall, so it couldn't be opened. The large truck was on their left. So, Kelvin could only squeeze in through the broken windscreen from the top of the car. "Hang in there, Mr. Miller." Olivia caressed Ethan's face with her trembling fingers. Tears rolled down her cheeks in large droplets. Ethan smiled weakly at her, saying, "Liv, you were right, after all. I'm afraid I'll be giving back my life to you. I'm not scared of death. I'm just afraid that when I die, no one will protect you and the kids anymore. I'm sorry, I never got to be a good father or husband. I caused you and the children to suffer and get hurt." He coughed, and blood streamed out of the corner of his lips. Even when he was on the brink of death, he was still solely concerned about Olivia. Don't cry. I told you I won't hurt you anymore." The blood on his palm only dirtied Olivia's face even more as he wiped her tears. Other than crying, Olivia had no idea what she should say. She only had one thought in her mind: she wanted Ethan to survive. A fierce gunfight was taking place outside. Fortunately, after realizing that someone wanted to assassinate Olivia, Ethan stationed lots of elites around them. Also, they had rammed against a shop. The wall of the shop served as a cover for them, giving Kelvin and the others time to rescue them. The gunfight went on for around 10 minutes. It only came to a stop when the sirens of the police cars were heard. Blaring sirens filled the air of the otherwise quiet street. Ethan was successfully rescued as well, but his back was covered in glass shards. Kelvin didn't dare to touch him, so he could only get Ethan into the ambulance. Brent's arm was injured. Covering his wounded arm, he said calmly, "Mrs. Miller, I'll escort you to a safe place first. These people aren't assassins." But Olivia shook her head. "I'm going to the hospital with him. Get my children and Everly to the island, please." Olivia got into the ambulance as well. The glass shards had pierced his body, but she didn't know how deep they went. She had no idea if his organs were hurt. If his organs were ruptured, then Ethan might not make it past tonight. On the way to the hospital, Olivia grabbed his hand as she said, "Ethan, promise me that you won't die." Ethan's breaths were getting weaker, but he tried his best to comfort Olivia. "All right, I won't die. I still have to protect you." Olivia's eyes were filled with heartache and nervousness. He was sent to the military hospital. As soon as he arrived, he was taken into the emergency room. He was wearing a black coat today, so the blood on his body wasn't quite obvious. In contrast, the white sheets under his body were dyed red from his blood. It was a terrifying sight. Olivia kept holding his hand. "You promised me. You have to survive." When he was taken inside, someone pulled Olivia's hand away from him. "Please wait outside." Before the doors closed, Olivia heard Ethan's voice. "Liv, wait for me." The doors closed with a bang. Kelvin stayed with Olivia, comforting her. "Don't worry. The best doctors in the country are here. They had rescued Mr. Miller from death a few times before." With Ethan severely injured, the heads of all the departments arrived at the operating room ahead of time. They had even prepared the blood he would need from the blood bank. Even though Kelvin was comforting Olivia, he couldn't hide the worry in his heart either. "Mr. Miller lost a lot of blood. His blood type is rare enough as it is. I fear that the blood in the blood bank won't be enough." Olivia suddenly looked at him. Chapter 902. Olivia had no idea about Ethan's blood type. Kelvin explained, "Mr. Miller's blood type is the rare P1 type." When Olivia heard that, her vision turned black. She almost fainted on the spot. She had learned medicine before. So, of course, she knew how rare this blood type was. The P blood group system was a different system from the ABO and RHD systems. It was categorized into 5 types: P1, P2, P1K, P2K and P. P1 and P2 were more commonly found, and the last 3 types were even rarer. P-type blood was already difficult enough to obtain. But Ethan was injured, and he needed a massive blood transfusion. The blood in the blood bank might not be enough for him. How can this be? Olivia took a step backward. If Kelvin hadn't supported her, she would have gone weak in the knees and fallen to the floor. If she knew that this would happen, she would rather be the one who got hurt. Don't be too worried, Mrs. Miller. Mr. Miller has always had a strong body, so he will be fine. If those shards flew at you, disfiguration is the least of your worries. Your body is already weak from illnesses, after all. Mr. Miller had made the right choice. Olivia grabbed Kelvin's sleeve, her palms drenched in cold sweat. Did they have backup blood in the blood bank? They do, so don't worry. Because of Mr. Miller's special blood type, they had already prepared it a long time ago. If all else fails, theirs also. When Kelvin said that, a doctor came out from within. Even though the doctor had his mask on, Olivia could see the urgent look in his eyes. Olivia wanted to ask about Ethan, but the doctor didn't even glance at her. He said to a nurse, "Crystal isn't here yet. Miss Heath has gone to perform military duties, but we've already notified her. She should be here soon." With a slam, someone kicked the door of the fire exit open. Olivia saw a woman in a military outfit, and she looked quite distinguished. The woman dashed out of the fire exit. She probably thought that the elevators were too slow, so she had run down from the helipad on the roof. She had a calm expression on her face, but her strides were quite urgent. "How is he, Uncle Tucker?" The woman hadn't even approached them before she asked in a hurry. She even looked like she was going to tear up. "Hurry and get in. The blood in the blood bank isn't enough, so it's a good thing that you arrived on time." With that, they ran inside in a hurry. Olivia looked at the woman from the back, recalling her urgent and worried expression. Olivia's sixth sense told her that this woman treated Ethan differently. Kelvin sighed in relief as well. "Don't worry, Mrs. Miller. Miss Heath has the same blood type as Mr. Miller. With her around, Mr. Miller should be fine as long as his vitals aren't injured." Olivia asked, "How did you know that her blood matches his?" "Oh, well, every time Mr. Miller got hurt in the past, she would be the one transfusing blood to him. We even joked and said that she's Mr. Miller's personal blood bank. We would bring her along when we were going on very important missions in the past. Mr. Miller's blood type is simply too rare, so we can't help that." Olivia stood where she was, feeling like she was surrounded by ice and snow. She had always known that Ethan's identity was special, and she never asked about it. But it was only then that she realized that to her Ethan was like someone from another world. She had never understood him before. There was a tiny glass shard embedded in the back of her hand. Everyone's attention was on Ethan just now, so even she had forgotten about it. When the blood dripped from her fingertips onto the floor at her feet, Kelvin finally noticed it. "Mrs. Miller, you're bleeding." Chapter 903. Kelvin hastily got someone to bandage Olivia's wound. Now, Olivia was wholly focused on Ethan, so she didn't feel the pain at all. The doors to the operating room opened. Crystal walked out. When she walked in, she was spirited and noble. But when she came out, even her lips were pale. She needed help to walk, too. She must have drawn too much blood, so her limbs had weakened. When Crystal came over, she was in such a hurry that she didn't notice Olivia. Now, as Olivia observed her, she was examining Olivia as well. She recognized Olivia right away. Olivia was the woman Ethan always had on his mind. After the operation, Crystal was also aware of what happened just now. With Ethan's capabilities, he would be able to protect himself under any circumstances. Even if he got hurt, he wouldn't allow himself to get so seriously injured. Almost his entire back was wounded, so there could only be one explanation. He was shielding someone. Who would be the woman he was protecting under his body? Crystal didn't even have to think to figure it out. Crystal was already quite weak by then. Still, she strode firmly toward Olivia. Before Olivia could say anything, Crystal raised her hand and slapped Olivia across the face. Kelvin didn't expect Crystal to behave like that. He hastily stepped forward, stopping Crystal. "What are you doing, Crystal?" Crystal completely ignored Kelvin. She stared at Olivia with a vicious look in her eyes. She looked like a hungry wolf, wishing she could tear Olivia apart and swallow the latter. Who do you think you are? Do you seriously think you're worth sacrificing his life for? Even if you fame your wretched life thousands of times, it's not even worth his one life. Olivia was still worried about Ethan, so when an unfamiliar woman slapped her without any warning, she was stunned. The words the woman said were extremely hurtful, and they could even be considered vicious. Olivia licked her lips, looking at the woman coldly. Who I am is none of your business, and you don't have a say in how he makes his decisions. Ethan's love for her was her greatest source of confidence. Crystal suffered utter defeat in this aspect. Calvin hastily tried to lighten the atmosphere. Crystal, the situation was dire back then. Also, Mr. Miller did it willingly. Don't blame Mrs. Miller for that. She was hurt, too. Mrs. Miller, Crystal sneered. Didn't they get divorced a long time ago? Calvin had an awkward look on his face. Everyone knew that she secretly liked Ethan. She had always been subtle about it, so everyone pretended they didn't know. But unexpectedly, when she saw Ethan getting hurt today, she immediately shouted at Olivia and insulted the latter. Crystal, in Mr. Miller's eyes, Miss Fordham will always be his only wife. If not, he wouldn't have risked his life to protect her tonight. Well, you've drawn a lot of blood, so you must be feeling very weak. You should go back and rest for now. Before Crystal left, she said to Olivia, his only wife. You still became his ex-wife, didn't you? It was like cold water being poured on Olivia's body. Crystal wasn't the only one who treated her with enmity. Even the doctors passing by pretended not to have seen her. Even the medical staff who bandaged her hand had come because Calvin begged. She was like the outlier who had accidentally entered this world. No one welcomed her. Calvin suggested, it's getting late. It's serious business to remove the shards from Mr. Miller. And no one knows how long that'll take. You should rest for now, Mrs. Miller. With your health, you can't stay up for too long. When I get news of Mr. Miller, I'll inform you right away. Ignoring the cold looks from the others, Olivia straightened herself. It's okay, I'll wait for the news here. She touched her cheek, which was swollen from the hit. She would return that slap someday. Chapter 904. The events tonight had happened too suddenly, and Brent was busy cleaning up as well. Calvin was the only person accompanying Olivia right now. When she was in the car just now, she had taken off her down jacket. She was only wearing a thin sweater now. There weren't any heaters in the corridor. The cold wind picked up, making her feel colder. Olivia thought of that night a few years ago. She had stood there, waiting for Ethan in the cold wind as well. Calvin wasn't too considerate. He only felt that Olivia looked a little pitiful from behind. The medical staff hurrying over seemed to be targeting her on purpose. Step aside, please don't stand in our way. It wasn't a bustling time at all. They simply didn't like her. If Ethan wasn't trying to save her, he wouldn't have suffered such severe injuries. In their eyes, Olivia was just a burden to Ethan. Calvin was a lowly figure, and even he had to make sure he didn't piss anyone off. Many doctors in the army hospital had been on the front lines and held military ranks. They were extremely proud, and they didn't care who Olivia was. Olivia knew that very well, so she didn't feel offended when the others looked down on her. She didn't do anything wrong, so why would she care about how others looked at her? One day, she would grow to the point where people would be shocked at her change. It was only then that Olivia realized something. She had made a very stupid decision by abandoning her studies for the sake of a man. If she had completed her studies, she would have become an outstanding doctor by now. She wouldn't be treated as a burden or a wallflower, and she wouldn't have to endure their cold gazes. She clenched her fists, swearing that one day, she would take back all the glory that belonged to her. Olivia ignored their gazes as she stood rooted to where she was, waiting for news on Ethan. Unexpectedly, not long after leaving, Crystal came back again. She had gone back to change her clothes. She had changed into a casual outfit, but she still looked quite noble and spirited. She was a soldier, so she had a different air from normal people. When Olivia stood next to Crystal, she looked helpless and pitiful. But Crystal looked strong and brave instead, just like a heroine. Even if Crystal applied some light makeup on purpose, when she appeared in front of Olivia, she was a far cry from Olivia in terms of appearance. Crystal stared at Olivia, furious. "You're just a wench, but you keep pestering him. For your sake, he." Olivia looked at Crystal, saying in a calm voice, "I've already told you that he willingly protected me. If you have any complaints or doubts, you can interrogate him when he wakes up. I don't know you at all, so I am not obliged to tell you anything. I'm curious, though, is it your people's policy to disrespect others?" Crystal retorted, "Get off your high horse. It's because of your face that he's so smitten with you." Olivia sneered. "How does it concern you if he's smitten with me? Are you jealous because you like him, but can't get him? Why would I be jealous of a wench like you? Without your face, you're nothing. I can at least give him my blood when he needs it. What can you do for him?" If it were before, Olivia would calmly reply that she could cook for Ethan. But today, she only said coldly, "I can do lots of things for him." "Which one are you referring to?" Crystal seemed to have thought of something. With a fierce look in her eyes, she glared at Olivia. "You shameless wench. You." With a bang, the doors opened. Chapter 905. After an operation that went on for hours, all the glass shards on Ethan's body were removed. For the moment, Ethan could only lie on his stomach. If a normal person suffered such injuries, they would get anesthesia. But Ethan painstakingly endured it. Those few hours were like hell to him. He had to constantly be awake so that he could see Olivia right away. Crystal walked up to him first. "Are you okay, Sova?" Ethan placed his chin on his crossed hands. He had already used up his energy, and he constantly had cold sweat because of his pain. He was already exhausted, but after the door opened, he still perked up and looked at the door. The first person he saw wasn't Crystal but Olivia instead. Ignoring Crystal's greeting, he said weakly, "Liv." It was only then that Olivia slowly walked over to him. Ethan reached out a hand, and Olivia held it. His palm was no longer dry. There was still sweat on it. "I promised you that I would leave the operating room alive." With that, he finally passed out. But he never let go of Olivia's hand. His actions were like a cruel slap across Crystal's face. His love was the best source of Olivia's confidence. Kelvin hastily asked, "Uncle Tucker, how's Mr. Miller?" Dr. Tucker snorted. "He's quite the lucky man. A glass shard almost pierced his heart, but it's a good thing that it missed by an inch. Also, it was a good thing that it was winter, so he had worn thick clothes. If this incident happened in summer, he would be dead by now." Kelvin asked, "So Mr. Miller is fine, right? He simply did this to himself. He didn't want to use anesthesia, and he insisted on enduring it. Remember, change his dressings regularly these days. Don't let him get any infections, or it'll be very troublesome." Kelvin replied, "Thank you, Uncle Tucker." Dr. Tucker waved his hand. "He'll be hospitalized for 2 days for observation. Go." Perhaps because he had confirmed that Ethan would be safe, Dr. Tucker was a little reassured now. His expression wasn't as cold as it was before. Ethan refused to let go of Olivia, so Olivia could only accompany him to the ward. Dr. Tucker glanced at Crystal. "Girl, why are you interfering in the couple's business? You know the sort of person he is. When he has made up his mind, he will never give up on it." Crystal stomped her feet. "Who said that they're a couple? They divorced a long time ago. He's now single, so why can't I court him? Or do you think I'd lose to a doll like her? Other than her face, she can't win against me in terms of background and position." Dr. Tucker sighed. "I won't bother about matters between you youngsters, but I have a word of advice for you, don't go too far. Don't keep pushing even after you've met a dead end." Crystal couldn't be bothered about that. She left and followed Ethan to his ward. After Ethan had settled down, she volunteered. "I'll keep watch over him. You can leave now." Even though Olivia never intended to reconcile with Ethan, Ethan had gotten hurt because of her. Out of obligation, she couldn't just leave Ethan like that. She moved her hand, which Ethan was holding tightly. "I do want to leave, but he won't let me. But Miss Heath, if you want to stay, I won't object to that." With that, she asked Kelvin to get her a stool. Then, she sat on it. Calvin suggested in a low voice. Mrs. Miller, you've stayed up for a long time. It's a double bed anyway, so why don't you sleep next to Mr. Miller? It's more comfortable that way. I'll go get a blanket for you. Chapter 906. Originally, Olivia thought that it wouldn't be good for her image. But then, she thought more about it. People were always prejudiced, and she had already left a bad impression on everyone. Even if she stood and kept watch over Ethan today, the people who looked down on her would continue to do so. So, why should she worry about other people's gazes? Her body was already weak enough. She had also been standing for a long time, so her calves were turning sore. If she was half sprawled on the bed, it would be torture for her waist and back. Sure, go ahead. Taking off her socks and shoes, Olivia got onto the bed. When Crystal saw that, she was extremely pissed. You shameless woman. What are you doing? Olivia blinked, saying with an innocent look, as you can see, the wench is tired and needs to rest. How can you sleep in the same bed as him? Crystal was so frustrated that she almost stomped her feet. Olivia was even more exasperated now. I didn't want to, but he refused to let go of me. While they were speaking, Olivia had already laid down on her side. She said calmly, also, Miss Heath, why are you so worked up about it? I've already done lots of intimate things with him, let alone sleep on the same bed. What does it have to do with you? Her question shut Crystal up. Crystal didn't know how to reply to that. So, Crystal could only go back to her usual argument. You're already divorced. If you have even a little bit of shame, you wouldn't pester him. Sorry, Miss Heath, but you must have gotten it wrong. Between him and me, the one getting pestered was me. Calvin dashed into the ward with the blanket in his arms. Mrs. Miller, I've brought the blanket. Please rest well. You must be tired after what happened tonight. Crystal said scornfully. What did she do that could tire her out? Calvin covered Olivia with the blanket. Turning around, he explained earnestly, it's already tough for Mrs. Miller to stand for such a long time. She can't compare to a rough woman like you, Miss Heath. You're always storming around. Before he finished speaking, Crystal kicked his calf. Who are you calling a rough woman? I dare you to say it again. If you're getting a blanket, why didn't you get another one for me? They're a couple here. Stop being the third wheel and just leave. Crystal hit him harder. Olivia sat up, unable to stand it anymore. Get out, both of you. He can't rest like this. Her voice wasn't too loud, but it was filled with authority. Crystal looked at her. Olivia glanced at Crystal with a cold look in her eyes, her gaze as sharp as an eagle's. At that moment, Crystal felt chills running down her spine. Olivia's gaze right now was extremely similar to Ethan's. Calvin didn't dare protest. Glancing at Crystal, he realized that she didn't intend to leave. So, he couldn't care less as he left the room. As if she was sulking, Crystal sat on the couch opposite them, staring straight at the two. Olivia ignored Crystal completely. Instead, she quietly kept Ethan company. She didn't fall asleep. With his injuries like that, she was worried that he might get inflammation and a constant high fever. So, once in a while, she would test Ethan's temperature with her hand. It was very quiet in the military area at night. The hospital was surrounded by lots of trees as well. When she looked out the window, she could only see the shadows of tall trees bending under the wind and snow. She couldn't see any skyscrapers at all. Her heart calmed down as well. Her mind was very active, though. The people who tried to assassinate her in the past had used underhanded tactics. They had never started a gunfight on the streets. This wasn't like an assassin's secretive moves. Instead, it resembled the work of people from the underworld, away from the mainstream. They were quite direct but also cruel as well. She wondered if these people were targeting her or Ethan. Olivia had a feeling that she had gotten into trouble. Chapter 907. They didn't manage to find the mastermind from before. But now, a new enemy had shown up. Also, their style was completely different from the person before. Olivia couldn't help but wonder if she had to hide under someone else's protection all her life. She recalled Mona's death and memories of other people getting hurt just to save her. That cruel rainy night had already turned into a shadow that forever loomed over Olivia's heart. If she didn't get stronger, she might not be lucky enough to survive the next hit. She thought about it for a long time. When it was almost dawn, and Ethan's vitals seemed to be stable, Olivia finally closed her eyes and rested for a while. The room was eerily quiet. It was only then that Crystal had a chance to peer at Ethan's face. When he was carrying out missions in the past, he would always wear a mask. No one knew his true appearance. And even if Crystal wanted to see it, she couldn't. At that moment, she envied Olivia a lot. Olivia could not only be close to Ethan, but she could also see him every morning when she woke up and said good morning to him. What bliss! When Crystal was earnestly studying Ethan, the latter suddenly opened his eyes. In her panic, Crystal averted her gaze. She felt uneasy as if she was caught red-handed. Unexpectedly, her whole focus was on Ethan, but Ethan never noticed her. When he woke up, the first person he saw was still Olivia. Like how Crystal had studied him, Ethan stared at Olivia greedily. He looked like he wanted to carve her appearance on his heart, and he only had eyes for her. His hand must have gotten numb. Changing his posture, he reached out as if to touch Olivia's face. But then, he seemed to have thought of something as he quickly retracted his hand. He looked like a child who had done something wrong. It was only then that Ethan noticed that there was another person in the room. When his gaze moved away from Olivia's face, the look in his eyes instantly turned cold. Crystal met his gaze. For a moment, her heart thumped wildly out of control. She opened her mouth to speak. Lifting his hand, Ethan put a finger to his lips, shushing her. It was like cold water poured onto Crystal's body. Crystal examined his face earnestly. She realized that he wasn't as overwhelmed as she was at all. Ethan even raised his hand and waved at Crystal, gesturing for her to leave. He didn't want anyone else to be here and disturb his time with Olivia. Realizing that, no matter how sad she was, Crystal didn't dare express her emotions in front of Ethan. She was as obedient to Ethan as she was arrogant to Olivia. She was extremely well behaved. After saluting Ethan, she turned around and left. When she went out, she even softened her footsteps and closed the door quietly. Finally, only Ethan and Olivia were left in the room. Even if his back hurt like hell, Ethan was quite happy. He gazed tenderly at Olivia. No matter how long he spent looking at her, he couldn't get tired of her. Even though Olivia had saved him back then, her looks were more important to him. Back when she was younger, she already had well-defined features. She looked like she had walked out of a painting. It was a rare chance for him to look at her as much as he liked. As if sensing Ethan's gaze, Olivia woke up from her dreams. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw the deep, loving gaze in his eyes, threatening to drown her in love. "You're awake." Ethan smiled. "Were you hurt anywhere?" Olivia licked her dry lips. She explained right away. "No, after you fainted, you grabbed my hand and refused to let me leave." Chapter 908. Ethan chuckled. "I know. Whether I'm sleeping or awake, I never want to let go of you." His face was very pale. His already fair face looked even more sickly now. He had just survived a close brush with death, and the operation alone took hours. But when he woke up, he behaved as if it wasn't his business. "I heard that you didn't get anesthesia." "I didn't. I feared that if I died, I wouldn't be able to see you for one last time," he replied calmly. In reality, he only thought of one thing. Olivia was born with resistance to anesthesia, so every time she got hurt, she could only endure the pain. It was the same when she bled profusely during childbirth, when she was getting her arm stitched, and even when her wrist was hurt. So, Ethan didn't use anesthesia either. He wanted to commit to memory the pain Olivia had once gone through. More importantly, he wanted to see her as soon as he woke up. If the operation last night had failed, he would die in his sleep. When Olivia heard his answer, she seemed to be thinking of something. Suffocating silence settled in between the two. Ethan spoke up first. "I'll send you to the island as soon as possible. It's not safe here anymore." "When you say that it's not safe, do you mean?" Ethan called Brent over. Brent had been bustling about. He also looked like he was in a hurry when he came in. Even his eyes were bloodshot. "Mr. Miller, It's our fault for failing to protect you well enough." As soon as Brent came in, he knelt on one knee. Ethan crossed his hands, placing his chin on top of them. He seemed quite nonchalant about it. "I'm lucky enough to have survived. Go and make arrangements so that Liv can be sent away as soon as possible." His tone was firm. At times like that, his greatest wish was for her to stay with him. But he had chosen to send her away as soon as possible. Ethan was planning something. He must already have a clue about the incident last night. Olivia looked at Brent. "What did you find out?" But Brent looked at Ethan. If Ethan didn't give permission, he didn't dare to say anything recklessly. "Liv, the children must have missed you quite a lot last night. Alicia and Zach must have met up by now, so hurry and go to them." "Everything's fine on my end." His behavior was too abnormal. In the past, he wished he could bind her with chains, but now, he kept trying to push her away. Once again, she felt the feeling of being discriminated against, just like she had felt last night. Olivia could stand other people judging her, but how could Ethan do the same thing? She said coldly, "I'm not leaving." "You've always wanted to leave, right? Why are you being stubborn now? Come on, Everly will keep you company on the island. You two can relax and recuperate on the island." Ethan seemed to be in a hurry. "Brent, what are you doing, zoning out like that? Send Liv away. Let's go, Mrs. Miller. Mr. Miller's life is not at risk anymore, and he'll recover after some good rest." Olivia didn't budge. "I almost died last night. I should have the right to know the identity of the culprit, at least." She thought that it was normal for everyone to regard her with disdain, but she didn't expect Ethan to think the same. They had been intimate with each other and lived under the same roof. They had also experienced life and death together. But in the end, she was still an outsider to Ethan. It wasn't that she wanted to be close to Ethan. She just didn't feel that it was fair to her past self. She loved him so much, and she had abandoned everything to stay with him. He knew everything about her, but she didn't know anything about Ethan. "Liv, there are some things you shouldn't know about. I'm doing this for your good." Chapter 909. It would have been fine if Ethan hadn't said that. But once he did, Olivia's expression shifted. "How long are you going to act selfishly under the pretense of doing it for my good?" Olivia vented all her dissatisfaction. "I loved you so much in the past, and I gave up everything for you. You have a mysterious job, and I didn't ask you about it. I also never asked you where you went on your business trips. I thought that this was my way of loving you, but what became of me in the end?" "Liv." Ethan wanted to reach out and hold her hand, but Olivia dodged him. "You know everything about me. When you're happy, you'll gladly spend a large sum to buy gifts for me, spoiling me to no end. But when you're upset, you take everything back and deny me every chance of escape, putting me in hell. But what about me? From the beginning until now, other than knowing that you're Ethan, what else do I know? From the beginning, you loved me like you would love a pet. You thought this was for my good, and that was good for me. But in the end, I turned out like this exactly because you were too self-righteous." Ethan silently gazed at the fuming Olivia. He didn't realize that she had been so upset with him all this while. "Liv, I have reasons for doing that. The more people know about my identity, the more dangerous it will be. So, the Prescotts moved overseas many years ago. They did it to avoid getting involved in danger." He sighed. "Never mind. Now that things have come to this point, I'll tell you everything you want to know. My identity was leaked, anyway. Brent, reveal everything you found out. There are no outsiders here, anyway." After getting his permission, Brent closed the door first. Then, he turned around and said to Olivia, "Mrs. Miller, the incident last night wasn't targeted at you. Someone wanted to kill Mr. Miller, and you just happened to be involved in it." As expected, Olivia's intuition was right. These people's behavior was completely different from those of the others back then. Who are they? How dare they do such things? According to the intel I've gotten so far, these people belong to some local underground organizations. Our country is very strict in this aspect, so even if there are remaining members, they won't dare to act so boldly. Olivia asked, "Then why?" Brent sighed. It started 10 years ago. Back then, there were various foul organizations of all shapes and sizes in the country, and many youngsters and families were their victims. You could always see them on the news, where families died a horrible death, jumped off buildings, and committed suicide with gas. As soon as a family member got involved with it, they would only be dragged further into the abyss. Only a few minor subordinates were caught in each operation to defeat them, and when it blew over, they would resume their activities. Their bosses were all in Shadow Valley, a district overseas. It's a complicated place that is also the largest crime trading center. Mr. Miller volunteered to be a spy in a criminal organization for many years. In the end, they were captured along with their subgroups in our country. Olivia was startled when she heard that. She didn't expect Ethan to have such experiences. Mrs. Miller, even from films and shows, you should be aware of how cruel those people are. Even if their headquarters are destroyed, people like them will keep coming back. As long as people exist, there will always be benefits to be reaped. As soon as the remnants hear of Mr. Miller's identity, not only Mr. Miller but also the people close to him will be in danger. Why did Mr. Miller insist on keeping your marriage a secret? He didn't want to expose you because he wanted to protect you. As expected, the truth was always too heavy to bear. Olivia said sullenly, then, Marina, Miss Carrington is different from you. Mr. Miller only has gratitude toward her, not love. Never mind. He should tell you about his feelings. I'm an outsider, so I can't explain it clearly. So, let's continue where we left off. Mr. Miller did many similar things. He's the best at disguising himself and working as a spy. He did things like getting top-secret intel from other countries and assassinating political figures. Out there. Even his codename strikes fear in the hearts of those who hear it. So, do you understand now why he was able to command warships as he pleased? Because all these military achievements were the glory he received in exchange for risking his life. But now, someone has exposed his identity. Chapter 910. Brent had a stern look on his face. Now that Mr. Miller's identity is exposed, the various forces that had grudges against him would pounce him like hungry wolves to get revenge. The incident last night is one example. The organization behind those people was the central figure in Shadow Valley 10 years ago. They sent suicide squads who weren't afraid of death and were trying to drag Mr. Miller down even if it cost them their lives. When Olivia heard that, she felt some lingering fear. Then he's in great danger now, right? It's relatively safe here, but as soon as he leaves the military area, there will be danger everywhere. Also, I found out on the dark web that someone had posted an anonymous bounty for Mr. Miller. If anyone killed him, they would get a reward of $1 billion. A high reward bounty like that would usually attract private assassins and mercenaries. After all, great rewards attract brave souls. As if he were an outsider, Ethan advised Olivia, in the past, I kept you because I could protect you. But now, being by my side is the most dangerous place you can be. You have to leave. He was protecting her with his life, but he was convincing Olivia to leave. Olivia had already made up her mind. I'll leave, but not now. I'll leave after the wounds on your back have healed. Liv, Ethan thought that she would leave without turning back after hearing the truth, but unexpectedly, she chose to stay. Don't get the wrong idea. Those are two different things. I never forgot that you hurt me before, but I also admit that you got hurt because of me. But, Brent said that it's safe here, right? It should be fine if I stay here for a few days, yes. He hastily left. Mr. Miller, I've already arranged everything for Master Zack and Miss Alicia. I've also spared some of those men, so you can deal with them when you've gotten better. Please rest for now. With that, Brent went out the door. A nurse came in with a cart, and she seemed a little nervous as she faced Ethan. Hello, it's time to change your dressings. Crystal came in as well. She was like a persistent bug. Leave the things here. I'll take care of it. Crystal walked toward the nurse. Then, she even glanced at Olivia as she emphasized her words on purpose. After all, I was always the one doing these things in the past. Ethan said calmly, Liv can do it. Sova, she's just a weak woman. What can she do? Your injuries are severe enough as it is. If she was too clumsy and worsened your injuries, it'll only be more troublesome. Let me do it. I'm used to these things. The nurse glanced between Olivia and Crystal with a gossipy look. By the looks of it, a drama was brewing. Ethan had a calm look on his face. I'm very grateful to you for transfusing your blood to me last night. I heard that you had drawn a lot of blood, so you must be quite weak right now. You need proper rest. I'm used to Liv taking care of me, so I may not be used to someone else doing it. Moreover, she had studied medicine before, so basic care like this is a piece of cake for her. Ethan was declining with every single syllable, but Crystal refused to give up. But, I heard that you got promoted recently, so you should be quite busy these days. You don't have to visit me anymore. When I've recovered, I'll visit you to thank you properly. With that, he looked at Olivia with a tender gaze. Darling, please help me change my dressings. When Olivia heard that, she had goosebumps on her skin. Even when they were married, he never called her that when they were outside, let alone now. If Crystal ignored it, she would be looking for trouble. So, she could only say, rest well. Then, she left in embarrassment.